Bienvenue, welcome once again to another Property Quorum. It's a rash bash, bashing of ideas together to talk about what's going on in the current property market. And today is no exception. We are going to be talking about the rental market. We'll probably get into that. First of all, Hamish McClay, would you lead the way?
Well, good morning to you all. We haven't quite got blue sky here in Oxfordshire today, but it's getting close. It's getting close. But it's not the dismal grey. But mind you, we're in May now, aren't we? Oh yes. And that one of the challenges about being in May is it was the start of this month, of course. We brought in the Renters' Rights Act. It's come to fruition. Sort of story of my life in a way, because I think, oh, that'd be great. Christmas isn't far away. And then before you realise it, Christmas is upon us. And this particular, what has actually descended upon us relative to the Renters' Rights Act is a mixture. But one of the biggest problems is brought further regulation, further difficulty in for landlords, because they've been pestered. Well, pestered is the wrong word, but they've had loaded upon them so many things, starting with the Conservative government, who started off, I think, about 2014, bit by bit, churning away, making it not worthwhile. Now, as we well know, if the landlords aren't working at opening their properties up and allowing some residents, the housing market does suffer. Competition is greater. It pushes rents up. So are we heading for that particular situation?
It's so hard to tell. I've actually been doing a tiny bit of research ahead of us. And I've got a couple of questions for you, Mr. Lees. If you had to describe the UK rental market in one word right now, what would it be?
I'm going to go with tough, and I appreciate that's probably a bit of a cop-out. I think there are very, very trying times ahead, which haven't yet been factored into by the government in their wake of the recent bunch of legislation.
The Renters Act. What's it called? The
Renters' Rights Act. So this has been released under a fanfare of this gives tenants more reliability, more security in their home. Which
maybe I'm a bit cynical about this, but would you say that tenants are feeling any real relief, or is it slightly less awful?
I think there's the reaction to the headlines, which is, oh great, I've got 12 months, secured tenancy, I'm absolutely fine. And then there's as always, the fine print, the reaction that happens afterwards. And there are a number of elements that I'm particularly concerned about within this legislation. So first of all, the Property 118 survey is the main crux of today's discussion, really. That survey was really powerful because they identified thousands and thousands of landlords actually completed the survey, which is the widest survey that's ever been done. And they found that predominantly 75% plus of the landlords are 56 years of age or older.
Right.
Okay. So it's not the younger bucks who are in the marketplace. A lot of them are predominantly older. They're also working at the same time. So what's happened with these cumulative changes over time is they've created various traps. So you've got a property, you've been renting it out for 10 years. Now, all of a sudden, you've lost the ability to deduct your mortgage interest against your rental income. That creates a trap unless you put the property into a limited company. That creates a taxable event, of course. And so landlords have had a culmination of this over the course of the last 10 or 15 years, as Hamish quite rightly points out. And they're getting to the point of wondering, is it all really worth it? I'm getting towards the end of my working life. Do I really need the hassle? And so quite rightly, a lot of these landlords are thinking about exiting the market or are actually serving notice. I read recently that Landlord Action, who's one of the specialists, tenant eviction specialists groups, have never been busier in their whole sort of 22 years of operation. And an enormous amount of Section 21s were issued in the week running up to May the 1st.
Of course.
Enormous amount. One landlord, he had, I think it was something like 56 properties, and served eviction notices for 51 tenants.
Wow.
Because of the risk that he's now facing with the backlog in the court system, which is really what's driving this pressure. It's not so much the fact that tenants get 12 months unfettered living within the property, but it's actually the consequences of if that tenant stops paying rent on May the 2nd, I've now got an enormous amount of work ahead of me to get them out of that property, and the court system cannot cope. There's been no beefing up of the number of applications that can be processed, and so they're really just saying, well, I'll take advantage of the old legislation. It'll be somebody else's problem, and the crux that the tenants haven't realised is where tenants, and this is what I've read, so I need to verify the truth of it all, but where tenants have failed to pay their rent and are then evicted from a property, the local councils who don't have any money are now under no obligation to rehouse those people.
Oh my gosh.
That's the backstop that has been written into this legislation. Excuse me. And I don't think many people have realized this, that responsibility has now been taken away from local authorities.
So hang on a moment. Does that mean we're going to potentially end up with increased homelessness?
That is the ultimate thing that will happen.
But I thought, maybe wrongly, that the tenants now have more negotiating power than they did at the peak of the rental frenzy.
Well, that's what seems to be being portrayed in a lot of social media groups, is that there are these people who think they're being clever by saying, don't pay your rent for months at a time. Landlords can't kick you out. When the landlord does eventually kick you out, the tenant will have a CCJ against them. That's the first point, which makes it harder to get credit, harder to get access to another property in the future. But secondly, the council's under no obligation to house you. And thirdly, because of the reduced rental supply, landlords are going to be very choosy about who actually gets access to the property, regardless of what the legislation says. And so I can see this creating a huge problem in the not too distant future. 12, 18, 24 months, once all the headlines have passed, I think this is going to create a huge issue in the marketplace. So whether or not there's going to be a U-turn on the legislation or the corporates are going to come in and save us, I do not know. But if we look at what John Lewis announced, I think it was last year, they were going to go into a build-to-rent program, putting an enormous amount of money into it, and they found they couldn't make it work. And that's a huge organization like John Lewis, who can't make a business model work that the average Joe private landlord was somehow getting on with it. For the
so one of our commenters has commented John Lewis exactly just as you were saying that. Thank you, Mo Musalio. Apologies if I've mangled your name. Are people still offering over asking rent, or has that started to disappear?
So that's one of the things that's been banned, apparently, is that there's no ability to now go into a bidding war over rent, and you can only increase the rent once every 12 months.
Right.
All I see that there's happens now is that it's probably like anything, the price is at a premium, and you either pay that premium or there's an underbid, a bit like I suppose offers on a property when you're buying. I don't think that's been particularly well thought out, and I think that the indication, the very clear indication that this legislation isn't working, is the Chancellor announcing that she's thinking about bringing in rental freezes, rent caps,
right? Yeah,
that sort of thing, because we need to get through this transition period of the next 12 months. I think you can't tell me that the government doesn't have the same data, if not better data, than the Property 118 survey. It must have that data. There's got to be.
We are frankly relying on the fact they've got better data. Yes. They are supposed to be the ones that are leading the way. If they don't have the best data, we're all sunk.
Quite right. And so somebody has had this data and then interpreted it in some wild way to go, let's do this, and to hell with the consequences. And it's going to be very interesting watching this play out over the next 12, 18 months. I don't wish ill upon tenants, of course. I think the intent was clear, was correct in some ways, but it was only affecting a minority of the market, not the plethora of landlords who are bad landlords, according to the media.
Right.
This whole thing has been overplayed, I think, in my opinion.
So let's go for meat and potatoes. Are properties taking longer to let?
Not in my experience. No, I mean they are letting within days. Certainly in our local area.
Well, I suppose that's good. So okay. And what parts of the UK still feel overheated, and where does it feel a bit more balanced? Is it still London that's madcap?
Well, London seems to be the predominant area where most of the landlords congregate as well, which one would expect, being a higher density of population, etc. But I'm not noticing on the whole a lot of properties sticking around for a while. I think this is another interesting element of the legislation, is that a tenant may have 12 months of tenure, but they also have to give 2 months' notice to the landlord. Now, if you think about this, you're thinking about moving. You've got a growing family. You spot a property that comes up for rent that you like. There's enormous competition. So now I've got to go and bid on that property, or I've got to put an offer in. I've got to come up with at least the deposit and then maybe a month's rent in advance.
Right.
But I'm also paying rent on my current property, which I've got to run for 2 months unless the landlord's generous enough to let me off. So I'm basically paying out 4 months of rent in one hit to enable myself to actually move to the next property.
I would have thought that most people, maybe me speaking out of turn, I would have thought most people can't come up with 4 months rent in one hit. I mean, if I was in that position now, I think I'd find it daunting. Are price reductions becoming more common on rental listings?
That's a very good question, Gareth. I have personally not noticed it. I have personally not seen, and unless I'm open to being corrected here, but I've personally not seen rent reductions happening on rented property. I've seen price reductions on a lot of properties offered for sale.
Right. Yes. Because the two tend to mirror each other, don't they?
Yeah, and 2022 was a very good market, and people still think we're living in that. But the most common element with properties for sale, of course, is the estate agent overvaluing. So they will go in, overvalue the property, put a huge price on it, and say we're testing the market. But in the rental market, there's no real need because the demand is so high.
So if we were to characterize it, is this really a rental crisis, a housing supply crisis, or is it more likely to be an affordability crisis?
That's a real melting pot of questions, Gareth. I think if we look at it, okay, let's backtrack. Was it 18 months ago when we got a new government who came in with the promise of building 1.5 million homes or whatever it was? That seems to have gone very, very quiet now. That promise, that pledge. That is probably one of the only ways that we begin to solve the current housing crisis. I mean, affordability has been squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. We've all felt it over the course of the last 6 years, no two ways about it. And so everything is becoming more expensive, but it doesn't help when you limit supply of the very thing that's supposed to be widely available, which is housing. So I think we've got a real undersupply issue. It's become less profitable for developers to develop because of the rising costs of employing people. So we've got less development actually happening rather than a continuation of what was happening in 2020 to 2024, for example. And so you've got this whole bunch of issues coming to a head. And we have now this piece of legislation sandwiched in the middle that, there was all this promise of cutting red tape, allowing developers to develop 1.5 million homes. Sounds amazing. Hasn't delivered, and the cost of rent is just going one way, as is the cost of living for everybody. So yeah, I don't know, if I was in Westminster, I'd probably be scratching my head going, what have we done here? Because the reality, I think decisions are being made in the boardroom without actually any concept of reality of what's going on the ground.
In the words of Vic and Bob, it didn't think it through. So what role are mortgage rates still playing in the rental market?
Wow, good question, Gareth. So from what I've seen, I'll answer that question from an investor perspective. So as an investor, we always ran with the slogan, "The deal pays." So as interest rates creep up, we would always discount down the purchase price of the property.
Right.
Okay, to counteract that balance. So when you're buying a property, it's a very long-term thing that you're thinking about. The average return for somebody who's in their 40s, who's buying a property as a buy-to-let, leveraged up to say 75%, your average return is maybe 150 quid a month, maybe if you're lucky. And so that takes an enormous amount of time to start to pay off. You're probably talking 10 years as the equity begins to grow, and then you can maybe do a refinance at a lower rate. But that's a 10-year business plan. Okay, so there has to be the deal pays and mindset when you're going into these things. And so the interest rates, yes, they're pushing up. It doesn't really make that much of a difference to an investor because they've maybe got, well, the 118 survey said that the average property portfolio was about 10 units. So, you know, there's usually cash flowing there to support a little bit of a difference in rates. But as time goes on and your equity position grows, it becomes less of a challenge.
All right. Hamish, wow. What should policymakers stop pretending right now, Hamish?
Well, we have a challenge, and it seems to be an epidemic, doesn't it? It started off with the Conservative Party. I don't know how many housing ministers they had in the time period. They sort of had something like 16 since
They didn't seem to get through them.
2010. And here we are basically now. Okay, we haven't reached the 2 years yet, but we've had two. We've had two so far, and it sounds as though there's going to be I don't know, whatever the shake-up sort of brings about, we may still have the housing minister, but very few of them have adequate experience in housing, never mind anything else. Now, when you actually combine the fact that they're not business people, they're largely people that have been brought up in a sheltered environment to the extent that they're almost sort of, they weren't exactly government employees, but it worked around that particular sort of angle. So they haven't actually needed to go out there and sort of really think things through, because if you like, if you're in that kind of employment, okay, cost of living is going up, but you haven't had to sort of worry about, like sort of Silas was just explaining, 10-year plans and this and whatever it sort of happens to be. So whoever is pulling the strings now is really pulling them in the wrong sort of way. We've got the Bank of England; they can't make their minds up. Because technically, in one respect, they need to increase interest rates, and everybody wants to pull them down. But there's just so much that's just sort of going on in the background. And just in case anybody's not familiar with the publication that Silas was speaking of, Property 118 is a very, very, I mean, it is, I don't know how many thousands of subscribers it's got, but it really does cover an awful lot of it landlords. It really is there for the landlords.
So you feel it is representative? Oh,
absolutely, because of the number. I mean, the size of this particular survey they carried out was well over 20,000. So that's not, it's not a small thing. Let's go.
It's not small potatoes, is it? Yes. Absolutely.
But when you start looking at the ages as well, because that's a significant contribution. So basically, the landlords are saying, well, they're not such a good deal. The corporates are really sort of looking at it from think, well, hey, hang on, there's going to be a situation coming here. We can actually sort of get involved. But we've also got foreign investors, because foreign investors are looking towards developments and looking towards properties, because they can actually see they've got money. Because bear in mind now, we've got one of the worst, where we've got the worst economy in this sort of the top 7 that we were allegedly.
Yeah, absolutely. We're at the bottom of the G7 as far as
nearly at the top of the sort of G7 at one stage, but
yes,
no, we're right. We're at the bottom, a long way from the top. And I think the trouble is we have sort of so many. But the worst scenario of the whole thing, and the government was told this repeatedly: if you're going to introduce surrenders rider, you have to tidy up your legal system so you can push through quickly. So what do?
Nothing. That's what they do. Sweet Fanny Adam.
We have this challenge. We do have this challenge.
I've got one last question, really, before we close this up for today, and it's been a good one. Sorry, I did push and punch a bit harder than I was expecting, but to Silas and to Hamish both, is there one myth about the rental market that needs killing off?
Just one.
No, 10 years ago, I was told that I should, if I've got some liquidity, I should put it into property and rent it out, because that means I can make a guaranteed turnover. I can put the rents up yearly, and I'll be rolling in it.
Well, again, if we look at the numbers, as Hamish has just quite rightly pointed out, thousands and thousands of landlords completed this survey. They gave full transparency on the ownership of their property structures, etc., and the majority probably were in a similar position to you, Gareth, where 2005, 6, 7, they'd started buying, they'd held the properties for 10, 15, 20 years. So yeah, they've probably done reasonably well out of it because of house price inflation. The myth that needs killing off is really that landlords are all bad. They're not. The overwhelming majority of the people like you and I, decent, hardworking people. They've got their head down. They've had a little bit of good fortune. They put some money into a property, and they've just let it wash its face, as we call it, over the course of a longer period of time, and they've benefited from some capital growth. All good to them. Over that time, they've provided a good, secure, quality accommodation for somebody to live in, who's probably been quite happy and hasn't actually needed the RRA because they've had 10 years of uninterrupted privacy in their home. They've had no rental increases or hardly any, and so we're really disturbing the entire market to bring in a legislation that deals with the minority of landlords who, by the way, will still fly under the radar, will still rent slums out, as we were talking off camera last week, I think it was, and some of the things that you've seen, Gareth, it's absolutely shocking. That will still carry on, and it will get worse because people are desperate. Okay, so
desperation creates environments in which that sort of thing can fester. Hamish, do you see any end in sight?
Actually, at this moment in time, no. We've got to wait. Things aren't going to settle. And Silas was indicating we're not going to see the true consequences this year. It will actually sort of creep into this year, but gradually it will get sort of deeper and deeper as we find these tenants are being removed. The properties become empty. There's a bigger demand on properties, and that's really going to sway through. I believe that'll be swaying through this year. So it's very, very difficult and would be a massive challenge for any new landlords, other than anybody from the corporate side of things, to start investing in this particular sort of arena.
I mean, Hamish, as a person who sits at the point where people are just interested in a property, you must have seen throughout the years the swathe of people looking for searches for buy-to-lets potentially. Have you noticed a difference in that coming up to the renters, the RRA?
No, that really hasn't had any impact, mainly because if you like, there's a lot of landlords, they're trying to get rid of their tenants, so they can't. They're in a way they're stuck between the sort of one place and t'other.
Right.
They've got tenants in there, and sometimes it's better to remove the tenants before you sell. Sometimes it doesn't matter. You can sell them with sitting tenants, providing the buyer is willing to sort of accept that. But of course, there's a new contract. With a new contract, the rents go up. So I haven't seen it sort of our particular sort of end. I mean, what we've had a steady. Our work's been very steady this year. In fact, it's marginally up sort of than it was compared to this time last year, which is sort of quite interesting. But that's not a reflection on the market. That's basically a reflection, I think, on our business and the way in which we're operating. Because I think what we're actually seeing now is much more sort of personal involvement, because people who are actually going to be renting, they have to be looking much more carefully now. And the big challenge is, it doesn't matter what the legislation is, it's still in the hands of the landlord whether they want that particular tenant or not. So they can be very fussy, they can be very choosy. So we're not really, the trouble is, we're bringing in regulation, but it's not taking us anywhere. It's a bit like giving doctors and train drivers massive great amounts of money and not telling them to do anything about it. So here we go, 12 months further on down the road. They haven't done anything. They haven't improved the situation. So basically, that's the way it keeps going.
You're quite right. If you were going to solve this equation, for the tenant's benefit, you would increase supply, surely. Okay, so increase supply, the demand falls for each individual unit, and rents come down.
So we're talking about increasing supply for, what is it now? Years.
Yeah, quite right. But everything we've done is penalising being a landlord, and that's the point I'm trying to make about killing this myth of all landlords are bad. They're not. You have to make it profitable for them to choose to put their money and the risk. I mean, you get a bad tenant into a property, they trash it, it's tens of thousands of pounds worth of costs, and you're not going to get that money back. So that's the downside to the investment that nobody sees. And I've seen some absolutely shocking stuff on social media. Yes. But you would increase the supply if you wanted to bring rents down and give tenants more security or more choice. The opposite is happening through the legislation. So somebody's not understanding very basic economics within Whitehall.
I wonder if how many people in Whitehall are face planting right now. Hamish, would you care to take us home?
Well, I think we're pretty well there, really. We've got a difficult situation that regulation hasn't made it any easier.
No, in many ways, it's made it worse.
And is likely to increase even more the queues in the courts to get things through.
Yes. And that's the one place where we do not want queues right now is courts. I think that's stretching back 6 months, I believe. Thank you so much, Silas. Wise words as ever. Not particularly helpful words, but wise. Hamish McLeod, thank you so much for your well-intentioned commentary, but once again, no great solutions, Hamish. Why don't you come to me with solutions? No, sorry. And thank you all for watching. I can see lots of you flitting in and out. At one point, we had nearly 60 or 70 people in here. I keep watching. We've got plenty more for you to feast your property eyes on. We've got, of course, the bun fight that is Cladding Matters tomorrow. Please do come along for that 1 o'clock, where we'll be discussing the latest in the scenario in Greenwich, I believe. We'll talk more about that then. But until next time, please keep your feet on the ground. Keep reaching for the stars. And in these troubled times, please do look after your mental health. Until next time, and you tomorrow, Hamish, take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.